The movie begins in 2007 with a 23-year-old young man named Cherry. As the film opens, Cherry narrates his feelings about the world, describing its beauty while also expressing his deep disconnect from it. He struggles to understand people's behaviors and emotions. Approaching a car that had been waiting for him, Cherry instructs the driver to wait at the station for 2 minutes before he enters a bank, wearing a mask and carrying a gun. Inside, he storms up to the bank teller, but instead of acting aggressively, he speaks to her with unexpected politeness, even asking for her name. As he looks in her eyes, he sees a deep despair, triggering a flashback to 2001 when he was a high school student. He recalls his relationship with a classmate named Emily and how he fell for her at first sight. After a lecture, Emily speaks to him, and they discover they are from the same town. However, when Cherry pulls out a picture of his ex-girlfriend, Madison, Emily forces a smile before walking away, clearly uncomfortable. Cherry reflects on his past relationship with Madison, remembering how she never truly respected him. He would often visit her at her dorm, but one night at a university party, he felt humiliated as she danced with other men, seemingly indifferent to his presence. Cherry also recalls his brief job at a restaurant, which lasted only 2 weeks due to mistreatment by the manager. He introduces his close friends, Roy and Jason, noting that Jason was among the most miserable people he had ever known, ignored and overlooked by everyone. He also remembers Jason's older brother, who returned from military service suffering from severe PTSD. One day, Cherry attends a party hosted by a friend, where Emily is also present. Under the influence of drugs, he gathers the courage to confess his feelings to her. They spend the night together, and Emily asks about his past relationship with Madison. Cherry describes Madison as emotionally distant. Despite forming a romantic relationship with Emily, Cherry notices that she struggles to express her emotions. Although he confesses his love to her, Emily tells him she doesn't believe in love, seeing it as nothing more than a chemical reaction, shaped by the betrayal her mother suffered at the hands of her father. Suddenly, Emily decides to leave the country to continue her university studies. Cherry is heartbroken and begs her to stay, but she breaks up with him without hesitation, asking him to accept her decision maturely. Devastated, Cherry impulsively enlists in the army. At the recruitment office, the officer initially looks down on Cherry due to his small frame. When asked why he wants to join, Cherry explains that he has seen people his age die and wants to protect those he loves. The officer, convinced by his sincerity, approves his enlistment. However, Cherry's friends strongly oppose his decision, with Jason particularly worried that Cherry will end up like his brother, mentally broken after his time in the army. A heated argument erupts between Cherry and his friends. Suddenly, Cherry receives a call from Emily, who tells him she is leaving for Canada the next day and wants to say goodbye. He rushes to meet her at the bar where he works, but when he arrives, he sees Emily standing with another man. Overcome with jealousy, Cherry interrupts them, but the man gets irritated and shoves him aside. Cherry urges Emily to leave with him, but she doesn't respond. Later that night, an older colonel at the bar strikes up a conversation with Cherry, asking about his future. When Cherry mentions his decision to enlist, the colonel grows frustrated, warning him that the army only looks out for itself and that Cherry is essentially walking into death. He asks Cherry if he truly believes he could shoot another man like himself, but Cherry is unable to answer. When Cherry returns home, he finds Emily waiting for him. She tells him she has decided not to leave after all. Overcome with emotion, Cherry confesses his love to her, but the decision has already been made. He has enlisted and can no longer back out. Emily, feeling betrayed, asks how he could make such a life-altering choice without consulting her. Cherry explains that he was lost without her and didn't know what else to do. He convinces her to go to the university she wants while he serves in the army, promising that it will only take 2 years of their lives in exchange for a lifetime together. Cherry and Emily eventually decide to get married, and Cherry fondly reminisces about the happy days they spent together. However, in 2003, his first day of military training arrives, marking the beginning of his struggles in the army. Cherry describes the brutal treatment from the sergeants, who constantly insult and berate the recruits. During a medical examination, a sergeant discovers that Cherry is colorblind. When Cherry asks if this will affect his service, the sergeant coldly responds that as long as he can see the color of blood, he can continue. Cherry soon befriends Himes, a fellow recruit who aspires to become a medic like him. He recalls how their sergeant seemed deeply disturbed, especially when he lost control during training and choked a trainee to death. The sergeant would often tell horrifying stories about children carrying bombs to attack soldiers, admitting that he once drove a tank over a group of them to prevent an ambush. Cherry begins to feel as though everything around him is just an act. The sergeant playing the role of a leader, the soldiers pretending to be warriors, and himself trapped in a nightmare disguised as reality. As training intensifies, Cherry witnesses several recruits attempting suicide to escape the horrors of military life. He and Himes undergo medic training, learning how to bandage wounds and provide emergency care. Cherry takes pride in saving 47 mannequins during simulations, but everything still feels unreal, like they are practicing on dolls rather than actual people. The illusion shatters on Cherry's first day on the battlefield. Stepping off the army truck, he is immediately in shock at the chaos surrounding him. The sergeant urges him to breathe and stay calm before ordering him and Himes to run toward the front lines to rescue 2 injured soldiers. Cherry reaches the first soldier and is horrified to find his intestines spilling from his abdomen. Despite his terror, he forces himself to act, carefully placing the intestines back inside and securing the wound until a helicopter arrives to airlift the soldier. That night, Cherry returns to camp, traumatized and unable to process what he has just witnessed. In the shower, he and Himes scrub their skin raw, desperately trying to wash away the blood and the memories. The next day, Cherry's unit moves into a village they have taken control of, distributing first aid and food to the locals. Cherry is disgusted when he sees a soldier throwing food on the ground for the children as if they were animals. Later, an elderly man with severe hand wounds approaches Cherry for help. Unable to determine the cause of the injuries, Cherry asks the sergeant for guidance, only to be told that the man has an infection and there are no more antibiotics. When Cherry insists on treating him, the sergeant coldly replies that the old man is better off dying and walks away. Frustrated and furious, Cherry does his best to bandage the wound and advises the man to seek help at a hospital. At the camp, Cherry observes that the infantry soldiers have developed an unshakable confidence after surviving battles. They bond over their shared experiences of killing, convincing themselves that they are brothers. However, Cherry sees through the illusion. This so-called friendship is built on a foundation of destruction and bloodshed. He and Himes fall into deep despair, questioning what they expected when they joined the army. A fellow soldier bluntly tells them that there is nothing waiting for them but death, and Cherry begins to realize that he was right. Desperate for some connection to his old life, Cherry tries to stay in contact with Emily. She is heartbroken by what he is going through, sensing the pain in his voice, but Cherry struggles to put his trauma into words. One day, Cherry, Himes, the sergeant, and their team set out on another mission. The sergeant recklessly speeds through rough terrain, ignoring Cherry's warnings that the vehicle might get stuck in the mud. Predictably, the truck becomes immobilized, and the sergeant, unwilling to listen, attempts to pull it out using another vehicle. Again, Cherry warns him that this plan could trap both trucks, but the sergeant refuses to acknowledge him. As expected, the second vehicle also gets stuck, forcing them to send for another truck to retrieve them. Himes and the rest of the team ride in the vehicle while Cherry and the sergeant stay behind. Moments later, a deafening explosion shakes the ground. The vehicle carrying Himes and the team is blown apart, killing everyone inside. Cherry runs toward the burning wreckage in shock, trying to put out the flames with his bare hands. But what he finds is beyond anything he could have imagined. The charred remains of his friends, reduced to nothing but burnt skeletons. He collapses in front of the bodies, consumed by grief and despair. That night, Cherry calls Emily in a desperate attempt to feel something other than pain, but he cannot bring himself to describe what he has seen. Sensing his devastation, Emily tries to comfort him, but Cherry is too overwhelmed. He hangs up, completely shattered, realizing that no words could ever capture the horror he has just lived through. After 2 years of service, Cherry leaves the army and is awarded a Medal of Honor. However, he feels unworthy of it, believing that all he did was survive. Upon returning home, he reunites with Emily after years apart, but adjusting to civilian life proves to be an overwhelming struggle. Haunted by the memories of war, Cherry suffers from severe insomnia, frequently waking up to the sounds of imaginary gunfire and visions of dead soldiers. His inability to sleep or focus makes him irritable, prone to violent outbursts, an extreme contrast to the calm, peaceful person he once was. Desperate for relief, Cherry starts taking sedatives to cope, but over time, his doses increase. Eventually, he quits his job and reconnects with his old friend Jason, who introduces him to drugs as an escape. What begins as recreational use quickly spirals into a full-blown addiction. One day, Cherry returns home late, unaware of the time, and rudely dismisses Emily when she questions him. This sparks a heated argument, leaving Emily mentally exhausted. In a desperate attempt to cope, she too begins using sedatives, and soon, both of them are nearly unconscious most of the time, drowning in their addictions. As Cherry descends deeper into addiction, Emily threatens to kill herself if he doesn't stop. Determined to seek help, Cherry visits a psychologist, but the doctor dismisses his condition, simply prescribing more medication instead of addressing the root of his trauma. This only worsens Cherry's substance abuse, and eventually, Emily gives in completely, joining him in using even harder drugs. The couple's addiction escalates to heroin, and they establish a routine, injecting each other at scheduled times. With no job and no money, Cherry turns to his family and friends, lying to them about waiting for military compensation while secretly using all the borrowed money to feed his drug habit. When those sources dry up, he approaches Joe, his drug supplier, and begs for money. Joe humiliates him, making him work for him in return. Later, Joe offers Cherry cash in exchange for transporting a locked safe to a man named Black. Desperate for his next fix, Cherry agrees without questioning what's inside. When Cherry returns home, Emily is overjoyed to see that he managed to obtain more drugs. Their addiction continues spiraling out of control, and they both acknowledge that they are slowly dying but have come to accept it. However, after taking what they bought, they realize the drugs are not as strong as expected. Joe had tricked them. Emily notices the locked safe Cherry was supposed to deliver, and in their desperation, they believe the stronger drugs they need might be inside. Their addiction clouds their judgment, and they make the reckless decision to break into the safe. They call Jason for help, but he fails to open it. Frantic, they try dropping it from a height and even pulling it with a car, but nothing works. Finally, Cherry pries it open with a metal tool, and when the door swings open, a massive stash of drugs spills out. Overcome with euphoria, Cherry and Emily feel as if the gates of heaven have opened before them. Without hesitation, they consume an enormous amount and pass out on the floor. A sudden, loud knocking at the door jolts them awake. Panicked, they assume it's the police and scramble to flush the remaining drugs down the toilet. However, when they open the door, they find Joe standing there. He already knows what they've done and warns them that Black will kill them for stealing from him. In desperation, Cherry tells Joe he has a plan, then heads straight to a bank. Once inside, Cherry hands a note to the teller stating that he has a gun. Terrified, the teller quickly hands him a large sum of money. Cherry rushes out, exhilarated, and hands the cash to Joe, who leaves satisfied. However, Emily is furious. They're once again left with no money and no drugs. Cherry reveals he had hidden some cash from Joe, but it's not enough. Realizing how easy the robbery was, he decides to keep going, robbing more banks in the same manner. Cherry soon becomes a wanted criminal as news outlets begin reporting on his string of robberies. Though his identity remains unknown, bank employees provide descriptions of his appearance. Meanwhile, Emily's addiction worsens, and one day, she returns home from work in agony, suffering from extreme withdrawal symptoms. Her body begins shutting down. She vomits, shakes uncontrollably, and even loses control of her bladder. Enraged, she accuses Cherry of neglecting her and failing to give her the heroin dose on time. Her hands tremble too much to inject herself, forcing Cherry to do it for her. Suddenly, Emily begins struggling to breathe. Panicking, Cherry rushes her to the hospital, realizing just how far they have fallen. At the hospital, the doctors urge Cherry to reveal what Emily took so they can save her life. Her parents arrive, expressing their concern and acknowledging Cherry's struggles. They tell him they know he is broken and hopeless, and if he truly loves Emily, he must stay away from her. Torn but realizing the truth in their words, Cherry decides to leave her. After some time, Emily enters a rehabilitation center to overcome her addiction. However, she eventually escapes and returns to Cherry. Despite everything, Cherry tells her that he will only drag her further into destruction. Emily refuses to leave, stating that she will remain an addict whether she is with him or not. Her unwavering determination to stay by his side prevents Cherry from taking her back to rehab, and the two fall back into their life of addiction together. Meanwhile, Jason is in desperate need of money, leading Cherry, Jason, and Joe to plan another heist. This time, Joe serves as the getaway driver, while Jason is tasked with collecting money from all the bank employees instead of just one teller. Cherry is given the gun to intimidate them. As they enter the bank, Cherry takes a different approach. He suddenly fires a shot into the air to establish control. However, this causes Jason to panic and flee immediately, forcing Cherry to abandon the robbery and escape as well. Furious at Jason's cowardice, Cherry and Joe berate him as they speed away. Determined to fix their mistake, Cherry decides to take Jason's place in the next heist. However, Joe insists that he will be the one holding the gun this time. Cherry reluctantly agrees, and the two enter the bank together. Suddenly, Joe fires a shot that nearly hits one of the employees. Enraged, Cherry yells at him and snatches the gun away. Joe, feeling betrayed, abandons Cherry mid-heist, leaving him to complete the job alone. Cherry barely manages to make a quick escape, jumping into the getaway car where Jason is waiting. Now fearing Joe might turn them in, Cherry and Jason drive through the streets searching for him. Eventually, they spot Joe walking alone and pick him up. However, Joe remains completely silent. When Cherry glances at him, he notices a gunshot wound in Joe's abdomen and is shocked, unable to comprehend what happened. He attempts to help, but it's clear Joe's condition is critical. Cherry urges Jason to drive to the hospital, knowing it's their only chance to save him. Jason, however, refuses, terrified that going to the hospital will lead to their arrest. Cherry insists, fully aware of the risks, but Jason breaks down in tears, apologizing to Joe. In that moment, Cherry realizes just how far he has fallen. From being a medic trained to save lives to a criminal watching his friend bleed out in front of him. Overcome with guilt, they ultimately leave Joe's body behind and flee the city. The weight of everything that has happened pushes Cherry into an even darker state of mind. Soon after, he meets Black and informs him of Joe's death. Black, who is owed a large sum of money by Joe, coldly responds that Cherry is now responsible for repaying the debt. He demands Cherry return all the money owed, threatening to kill Emily if he fails. With no other option, Cherry prepares himself for another bank robbery. Returning home, he finds Emily asleep, unaware of the danger looming over them. She weakly asks him for another dose of heroin, and Cherry gently tells her he will give it to her when he returns. We return to the moment where Cherry meets Black and tells him to wait for him at the station. Entering the bank, Cherry calmly asks the teller to hand over the money. However, this time, he removes his hat and mask, fully exposing his face to the security cameras. He then places the gun on the counter and instructs the teller to press the alarm. Afterward, Cherry walks outside and hands the stolen money to Black. Then, he heads toward the main street and watches as police cars speed past him. To draw their attention, he fires a single shot into the air before sitting on the sidewalk. Accepting his fate, he injects himself with one final dose, savoring the sensation as if bidding farewell to the world. Moments later, the police arrive and arrest him. In 2007, Cherry is sentenced to prison. There, he enrolls in the rehabilitation program and begins his journey toward recovery. After serving 14 years, he is granted parole and released in 2021. As he steps outside, transformed into a completely new person, he is stunned to find Emily waiting for him. Now free from addiction, she smiles at him, and with tears in his eyes, Cherry walks toward her. Together, they embrace, ready to start a new chapter of their lives, this time free from their past demons.